is a 5-metre tall chandelier made of 25,000 tampons, if you can imagine that. And it really demonstrates sort of the humorous nature of the work. Sorry, not crooked. Yeah. So it's called The Bride, which is kind of funny because it's a chandelier made of tampons. And I think it makes us reflect on the bride as like this virginal woman who's kind of packaged and consumed on her wedding night by the man, but then it's made of tampons. So it's like, there's also this kind of messiness to it. And I also like to think that if we were to throw water over the bride, or if it was to get rained on, which we hope doesn't happen, because that would ruin artwork, but if that was to happen, then it would expand to like twice its size. And I think that's quite interesting in thinking of like the potential of women's voices and our interpretation of what womanhood is, the potential for it to expand to not be kind of these narrow definitions that we've been educated to kind of accept. Yeah, so I won't talk too much about Big Boobie and Bongo, because I'm going to be interacting with them. But I wanted to touch on Big Boobie as a response to the sirens. So when the sirens, this piece here, was first shown to the public, fast young men called it disgusting, and young women were so offended by it, they could not look at it. They wouldn't even look at it. So I don't know how they used to be offended by it, but apparently they wouldn't even look at it. And I think that's interesting. It demonstrates how women were kind of educated to view the female body with disgust, and yeah, something not to be looked at. They wouldn't even know how their own bodies really functioned. They weren't given that education. And nowadays we're educated to look at like our soft porn equivalent of this, page 3, and we're educated to look at it and be like, that's amazing, she's got beautiful boobs, I wish I had boobs like hers. And actually it's just part of the same kind of narrative, but now it's been swung around to the other side, and we're meant to see that as empowerment, whereas actually it's not empowerment. And I feel like with this piece, the Big Boobie piece, Joanne Conchalis is inviting us to kind of challenge that and resist these kind of dominant narratives and sort of say there are other ways to view females and womanhood. So yeah, it's bouncing off the wall, it's kind of reclaiming actual space, so it's actually coming out and intruding into our space. When we did a workshop about this before, Steph actually wanted to hug the piece, so it turns out there's different reactions to us. It's humorous. She created it thinking about Allo Allo and Madonna with the big boobies, so there's a humour to the piece. It's loud, it's colourful, so it also has these metal hooks, which we'll touch on a bit in one of the workshops, and that evoked ideas for women of plastic surgery or being pinned to the wall. So there's a lot of different ways we can use our reactions to these artworks to kind of re-educate our stance on what womanhood is, and maybe we'll come to a different place at the end of it. I think that's what I'm saying now.
Right, so I think one of the big defences of page 3 and kind of this sort of these imbalances in gender when we look kind of around the gallery or various other industries or organisations, that kind of thing, is that a lot of the time people think, is that all you've got to get happy about? Like, is it not quite a small thing in the grand scheme of things? But I think what the others have touched on and what we're kind of trying to communicate today is that it is all part of a kind of wider systemic sexism and very institutionalised sexism. A lot of it with kind of historical legacies, a lot of it with kind of almost legal legacies in that, 100 years ago, for instance, education for women was the exception rather than the norm, that kind of thing, and that still has a legacy today. So just as a bit of context, I'm going to fire lots of stats at you just to kind of show how this kind of correlates across the board, so politics, music, sport, tech, all these kind of things, this sort of institutionalised disparity going on there. I'm not going to read out all the sources, just because there is a lot of figures that I'm going to check at you, but if anyone does want them afterwards, you can see me and I can let you know where they're from. But very quickly, I thought we'd just do a really quick straw poll. Who has seen page 3? Put your hands up. And who's seen a naked woman in an art gallery? Right. Has anyone ever seen a woman of colour on page 3? I never have. Disabled woman on page 3? Plus size woman? Mature woman? A woman without makeup even? Any of the above in an art gallery? Maybe so, sometimes. TV, magazines. We're kind of getting better probably if you think about the kind of TV shows, films, that kind of thing, but there's still, that probably shows just how tightly controlled this sort of representation of women and women's bodies are across the board. Obviously it's not just limited to the way women's bodies are portrayed, we're often sort of sidelined altogether. So just to sort of give you a bit of context of that. In literature, which is a very dear cause to my heart, I run a charity that's all about sort of celebrating women's writing, so that's This is a particularly pertinent one for me. Women write and sell and read and buy more books than men, but in the mainstream media, 75% of the book reviews are of books by men. And just to sort of think about that, we're already squashed to a quarter of the space, and then if you think, you know, if you're writing something a bit more experimental, you're a queer woman, trans woman, disabled woman, you're already being squashed, you're potentially going to be pushed out together, so think of all the voices that means. These sort of disparities have very significant consequences. You think there's a lot of voices that are just then not going to be heard at all or represented. Only 20% of news articles are about women, most of which are about violence or victimhood in some way. 200 news anchors on CBS and NBC, only 12 were women in 2013. Women account for only 5% of positions of power in the mainstream media. There has never ever been a woman editor of Times, The Guardian, The Mirror, The Mail or The Mail on Sunday. Women working in the film industry are outnumbered by men by a ratio of 5 to 1. Is everyone familiar with the Bechdel test? Which is for film, which is that there has to be more than 2 women characters. They have to talk to each other, and they have to talk to each other about something other than a man. Films that pass the Bechdel test actually make much more money than those that don't, but they still only account for about half of all films. In the top grossing films of 2013, women account for only 1 in 6 protagonists, and only 1 in 3 of the speaking characters in the top grossing films of 2013. In the history of the Academy Awards, only 4 women filmmakers have been nominated for Best Director, only 1 has ever won. And of the 16 biggest paychecks earned by actors in 2013, not a single one was by women. In politics, men currently outnumber women by 4 to 1. Only 1 in 12 ministers are women. Women's average representation in business is only 10%, even though companies with more women on their boards outperform their rivals by between 40 and 60%. But women account for only 1 in 7 of the directors on boards of companies in the FTSE 100. So I know I'm firing a lot of numbers at you, but it's kind of just to sort of show that they are, women are under or misrepresented across, many, many visible fields. Inevitably, that has an impact. So on average, we see between 400 and 600 adverts a day. Just 3 minutes of looking at a fashion magazine has been shown 70% of women to result in increased feelings of shame, guilt and depression. An argument often used in defence of page 3 and kind of the beauty and fashion industry centres around kind of the model's individual empowerment and agency. But there's a recent study by the Model Alliance who found that 70% of models suffer from anxiety or depression. Over 60% have been asked to lose weight by their agencies. 1 in 3 models has been pressured to have sex with someone at work. Of those, only a third felt they could tell their agencies, and out of those, 2 out of 3 of the agencies didn't see a problem with it. So obviously from that sort of shows the kind of huge pressure that's put on models to represent a certain ideal of what women should look like, what they should behave like, and obviously that has a wider impact on all of us. There's a heartbreaking study on the Girl Guides that they did recently, but it kind of really shows the sort of impact. So of the girls polled, which were kind of ranging between 7 years old and 21, that 80% of them think women are judged by their looks rather than over ability. 75% of girls felt boys wanted them to look like the girls that they see girls and women in the media. Over 70% said the shaming of celebrities in the media made them feel anxious about their own appearance. 1 in 5 7 to 11-year-old girls have been on a diet. Over 70% of 11 to 21-year-old girls say they'd like to lose weight. 1 in 5 have tried a diet after hearing about a celebrity using it. 1 in 100 women have a clinically diagnosed eating disorder. 1 in 3 women refuse to leave the house without makeup, which just sort of shows, how this all sort of feeds into this wider narrative that is hurting us all, basically. I'm sure lots of you are probably familiar with the Everyday Sexism Project. If not, look it up. That kind of collects sort of various stories anyone can submit to it, and that's everything from sort of examples of everyday sexism that we see as we go about our business. That's everything from sort of toys that say, there was a great one on colouring books the other day that had like the big brilliant colouring book for boys and the big beautiful colouring book for girls, to kind of stories about, sexual violence, street harassment rate, all that kind of thing. A couple of more stats is that 70% of girls aged 11 to 21 have experienced sexual harassment, 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual violence, and 85,000 women are raped on average in England and Wales every year. These are all part of the same problem, so it's very easy to look at something like page 3, look at the kind of gender imbalance and women's representation in a place like an art gallery and say, it's just one of those things, it's just part of day-to-day life. But this is across the board and it's hurting all of us. It's part of a systemic problem and it's the system that needs to change.
Well, I know we've spoken a lot at you. We just really wanted to provide a bit of context for why we're discussing the campaign, particularly why we're discussing it with in reference to Joanna Vasconcelos's work. But now we'll break off into a couple of groups and we'll be talking, so we want you to talk to us as well now. It's not just going to be us talking at you. But before we break off and talk more about representation and art and gender and all these brilliant things, we'd like to welcome you into a minute's respect for the group. So we can really sort of have a think and an appreciation for the booth before we...
Are we going to come forward a bit? So we're near
Would you like everybody to
yeah,
come forward?
could we all move a bit forward? More towards the booth.
Come to the booth,
Yes.
Come to the booth.
Come on. Yeah.
We'll get closer to the booth and
Come on.
before we go off and talk about